I am experiencing something I've never experienced before, which is that like my team is almost winning too much, which like it's never happened to me before because like I'm a
Uh,
Mets fan, I'm a Mavs fan, I'm an Eagles. Like this has never happened to me in my life. I've never had the team that was just like, oh wow, you just keep like going to the championship, huh? It's a weird feeling.
yeah, you can't get used to it because you run the risk that this is gonna form your like set point of what sports feels like, and it'll just
Yeah,
never be this good again.
I'm not kidding that like I was getting texts from people throughout the entire game, like congratulating me and saying you must be losing your mind. And I am so broken by sports that I was not happy until the very, very end.
You were like,
Because
it's not real.
yeah, like they're gonna take it away. Like they're gonna
Uh-huh.
find a way to take it away. Like this is what happens is that like the second quarter or the second half starts and Mahomes drives down and they score 2 touchdowns in a row and it's like, "Oh yeah, okay, we're back." And I've seen this script before and I just
Yeah.
literally until there was a minute and 40 seconds left in the game and we were up by 20 points. I was like, "Okay, maybe now
Uh,
I will let myself believe." Hello and welcome to Flanagan's Wake, a Doof Media podcast watching, analyzing, and discussing the collective works of Mike Flanagan. My name is Scott Daly, and I am your host. And joining me, as always, is the voice in my head that sounds like one of my old college friends, Matt Freeman. How's it going today, Matt?
you record that podcast, Scott.
I'll do it. I'll do it.
You're
All by
doing
myself.
great.
Thank you. See, folks, the joke is that Matt is actually one of my friends from college, so he is. It's just an accurate statement.
Yeah.
What I just said there.
It's a joke with a really long setup.
Uh-huh. But everyone that like has been listening to us for years was like laughing their fucking asses off.
It's true.
And the rest of you just don't get to be in on the joke until after I explained it for several minutes to you because that's how comedy works.
Yeah,
Matt,
you're welcome.
this week on the show, we are beginning our first little departure from the works of Mike Flanagan. We're taking a little detour into one of the books that Flanagan adapted into his next film on our list. The film is Gerald's Game, and the book is Gerald's Game, Stephen King's Gerald's Game. So, for those of you that maybe have never been a part of our whole book close read thing, basically what we've done is we've divided the book into 75 to 100 page sections roughly, and each week we're going to read those sections and we're going to come on the podcast and talk about the book, talk about the detail of those sections, maybe focus on some of the bits of writing we really like, talk about the themes, and talk to Matt about how he's enjoying the book because this is a first read for Mr. Matt Freeman over here. So we really enjoy these close reads. We think they're a lot of fun. And I think it's going to equip us with a lot of great information that we'll take into Mike Flanagan's Gerald Game when we eventually get there in a few weeks.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to talking about the movie. I'm looking forward to talking about the book. I'm looking forward to seeing if we can find any interesting decisions that Flanagan made, as a departure or as an adaptational choice. I think there's a lot of fun space for conversation here.
Sure, absolutely. This week on the show, we are going to be reading chapters 1 through 8 of Stephen King's Gerald's Game. So the first 8 chapters, roughly first 95 pages or so. Matt, before we dive into everything in detail, how you feeling? What was your experience jumping back with King after a few months and this book so far?
Yeah, well, we did just read from a Buick 8 last month, so it wasn't much of a
Doesn't count.
break. But
It's not for the show. Doesn't count.
yeah, no, you're right. Sorry. Yeah, I mean, I love getting back to it. This book is a really different experiment, right? Very different from his normal thing that he does.
Absolutely. Yep.
So that's fun. Like it's immediately fun to see King stretches his legs in this way that I've never seen before, where, specifically what I mean by this is it's almost everything is happening not just in this one room in a physical sense, but in this one person's mind. It's an extremely internal, book. The narration, the narrative itself is just different from anything else you've ever read. So it's been an experience so far, and the effect that it has on you, it's almost hypnotic. It really pulls you into this character's mind, um, and I'm really enjoying it, and I'm finding it very effective, and I can't wait to talk about it with you.
Great, great. Yeah, this will be, I believe, only my second read. I think I only read this one the first time when I did my chronological read through all of Stephen King a few years ago. So this will only be my second read, but I really enjoyed this book on the first read. I think it was after I had seen Flanagan's movie that I read this book for the first time. So I've never kind of gotten the uh, unmessed with version of this book in my head. It's I've always had Flanagan's film in my head when I was reading this story, and I'm sure that does influence my feelings on it a little bit, because you have Flanagan's characters and how he chooses to shoot the movie and show the different events of this book. So that definitely influences me for sure. But I really enjoyed this novel the first time I read it, and I'm with you. These first 8 chapters, really quick read for me, really captivating. Just kind of dove in one setting and knocked them out, and then I was was ready to talk to you about it.
Yep, yep.
All right, let's get into it. Gerald's Game. Stephen King's Gerald's Game was released all the way back, Matt, if you can remember this far, May 1992, over 30 years ago. We were 7 years old,
Hmm.
and this book came out. It is one of two novels released this year, the other being Dolores Claiborne, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a sec. Back when we did Kingslingers, though, Matt, we talked about this thing that King did in the early '90s, where we kind of dubbed the '90s a very experimental period for King. In the early '90s, he does this thing where he really shifts the stories to focus on women's rights, and the sexual and physical abuse that they endure from men. And it's not as if he's never written about women before, right? I mean, for Christ's sake, his first novel is Carrie, right? He's always written about women, but it just seems like there is a period here from like '92 to like '95 where he just seems very laser focused on every one of my books is going to be a female protagonist, and I'm going to be focusing on the trials and the tribulations and the issues they go through at the hands of men. Um, and Gerald's Game definitely fits right into this era.
Yeah, I think one thing that makes these stories work, or I'll speak specifically about this one, is that he's exploring sort of the darkness of the male side of the equation, and he's also exploring what that's like for the women at the same time. So it feels very vulnerable and authentic and brave. I want to say to be a man who's kind of probing the depths of male darkness,
Yeah.
because to do that you're sort of admitting, not sort of, you're admitting that you have these thoughts and urges and so forth. So I actually admire that he goes so far with these stories.
Yeah, I know. I completely agree with that. I think King has never been afraid to plunge into the darkness of all humanity, but even himself, right? And I think this
Mm,
is a book where you don't meet a man that you like in
yeah.
this novel, and so I think that is all very intentional, and I think that is something we're gonna have to definitely keep in mind as we work our way through it.
Yep.
To just give everyone a refresher on what these books I'm talking about are, Insomnia is a book that we covered on Kingslingers. It was released in 1994, and it features an opening which our antagonist horribly beats his wife. It also has a large confrontation that takes place in an abused woman's shelter, and the large kind of overarching plot point that is motivating the story of this book is a conflict about the right to abortion. And when preparing this, I was reminded that when we covered that book, Matt, not too many years ago, Roe v. Wade still was the law of the land and existed, and it's like, Jesus, how things change so
Yeah.
quickly.
It was a really weird time to be covering that book because everything was in flux at that exact point. So,
Yeah, it was just kind
uh,
of starting to ramp up to the point where you could argue like this is the way it's going to go.
mhm.
And I think we even talked about that when we covered the book, but yeah, it hadn't happened when we left that novel behind, but it
Yeah.
certainly has now.
Yep.
There was also Rose Matter, a book that was released in 1995 about a woman fleeing from her abusive police officer husband. And also like a creepy magical painting, but that's not the point. Then we have this book and its sister book, Dolores Claiborne. These are two books in what was originally supposed to be in King's Head, a trilogy of books all centering around a solar eclipse that occurred in the summer of 1963, the path of totality going right through the middle of Maine. Both of these books are in that world, and maybe we'll see what this eclipse has to do with our story a little bit later. But both of these books center on women in abusive relationships, and both of them, I think you could argue, basically operate around a similar gimmick of sorts. In Gerald's Game, as you mentioned, Jessie is basically just talking to herself for the vast majority of the book. It takes place in one place. There's one character talking to themselves or different voices in their heads. In Dolores Claiborne, the gimmick is the entire text of the book is just Dolores's portion of a recorded police tape as she is telling the story of the murder of her husband. So we only get to hear her voice, and that's the gimmick. That's how it's told from that perspective. So two books trying to do something both similar and different simultaneously, I think.
Yeah, so basically, in both cases, King said, "How thoroughly can I break all traditional rules of narrative and novel writing craft and still have the book be great?"
Yeah,
Uh,
essentially, yeah.
it's fascinating. So you said two books in what was supposed to be a trilogy. Do we know why it was not a trilogy?
I don't know. Like, I think a lot of people link Rose Matter to those other two books
Mm,
specifically because it like Insomnia, is a book that I think fits in this period we're talking about, but it is kind of the outlier in the period where I think Rose Matter much more closely aligns with Gerald's Game and Dolores Claiborne. I honestly can't remember if that was supposed to be the third book, and then King kind of changed his mind about the direction of that book, or he just had a third idea, or just wanted to do a trilogy and then never had a third idea. But
mm.
yeah, essentially, these are the only two books circling around this particular solar eclipse.
Okay, cool.
The thing that I want to get across with all this, though, is that this is the 90s and King is experimenting in the 90s. You and I read Desperation and The Regulators, and we talked about the ways in which King was experimenting there. And I think he's definitely experimenting with style and and as you said, the rules of narrative and novel writing with these books. So I think that makes it a fun read. I think it's going to be really enjoyable to pick this thing apart and figure out how it works and what it's saying. And of course, we have to keep in the back of our mind that this is a show about Mike Flanagan, and so we are doing this essentially in service of eventually having a conversation about the movie as well.
Yes, yes. Um, so we'll probably sprinkle in some discussion about, since you and I have both watched the Mike Flanagan movie, might mention where it's appropriate, like, oh, the way Flanagan did this scene, such and such. I think we'll talk about that when it's appropriate to.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and I think that's a good thing to mention. Yeah, for transparency for anyone listening, Matt has not read this book. I have, as I said, but we both have seen the film, right? So
Mm.
while this is going to be a new book experience for you, Matt, you will see the ways in which the book is doing similar things to the movie, and you will kind of sort of know the larger shape of what the story is going to eventually be. So I don't think there's going to be any specific and bold predictions coming out of you in this read. It doesn't mean it's not going to be enjoyable to see you experience this, but it is going to be a little bit different from our kind of complete blind read thing.
Yeah, exactly.
I am curious how you think this will change your experience, right? Because you have seen the Flanagan film, you do kind of know the larger shape of this story. How do you think that's going to change how you experience it?
Um, well, first of all, I'll say I'm looking forward to it, specifically because I have the comparison, the comparison point in my mind. I'll remind you, I guess, remind everyone rather that I'd seen the Shining miniseries and the TV show, sorry, and the film before we talked about the book. So this isn't the first time that's happened.
Sure.
So it's not. I don't feel like it's going to. I feel like if anything, it just provides a base of context for us to draw those contrasts that I was just talking about, where We can say, the way Flanagan chose to interpret this or that. Um, and it's such a, in particular, this book, like The Shining is one thing. The Shining is a beloved story, obviously, but this is a really unusual book, and it's first of all, it's just unusual on its own merits because it's what we just talked about. It's this really strange thing. I don't know if I don't know if I said it quite, clearly. Like the rules of when I say the rules of narrative and the rules of novels, it's like if I wrote a novel that was this internal and had this little plot, as it were, everyone would just be like, "What are you doing? This is not how you write a novel. You're supposed to have characters. You're supposed to. It's not all supposed to be this internal dialogue inside the character's mind. This is not what you do."
Yeah.
But Stephen King has written 10,000 novels. He says, "I'm just like I know how to break the rules. Right? That's what an artist is. An artist is someone who knows how to break the rules, and
Yeah.
that's what he's doing. So there's that element, and then another layer on top of this is who picks up that book and says, you know what I want to do? I want to adapt this book into a film. This book where it has no plot, it has one character in a room by herself. That's a perfect candidate for a film. Who does that? Well, Mike Flanagan does that. So that's going to be it. And he has to make all kinds of creative and interesting and unique decisions to make that work. As just to, for example, he has to do stuff like have the characters that she's imagining manifest in the room with her, for
Mhm.
example,
Yeah.
which the book doesn't do yet. At least it might. Um, like it's just a rich ground for specifically talking about adaptation, talking about stretching the rules of storytelling.
Yeah.
I feel like that we're going to have a lot of rich conversations in that arena.
I completely agree with all of that. I think it's pretty fascinating. Like I think the story of Mike Flanagan is that like a lot of people started paying a lot more attention to him when The Haunting of Hill House came out. But I think in a certain subsection of the community, the idea that he was directing Gerald's Game was met with a lot of what? Because yeah, I think the general sentiment was that that was an unadaptable story, and then the fact that he, spoilers for our talk about the movie, pulls it off, is the thing that got a lot of people to really like say, "Oh, this guy's got something. This guy's a little different." And we've already watched 5 of his films, and we have great things to say about every single one of them. They are very great films. It's very clear he's a very talented director who does have something special. We can see that now having gone through them. But like in his trajectory of his career, this is like, oh, you pulled off what a lot of people thought was impossible. Okay. All right, let's see what you can do now.
Mhm.
And that's kind of where his career has gone from there. So yeah, this is a very, very kind of exciting, uh, you know, um, watershed moment of his career, and I think
Yeah.
it's going to be fun to examine it. So let's get into it. Let's do it, huh?
All right.
All right. So, one thing we like to do as we begin the new book is Stephen King usually puts a quote from something at the beginning of his book, sometimes multiple quotes. And there's no exception here. This book opens with a quote from the W. Somerset Monum short story titled Rain. And that quote is: Sadie gathered herself together. No one could describe the scorn of her expression or the contemptuous hatred she put into her answer. You men, you filthy, dirty pigs. You're all the same. All of you pigs. Pigs. So, Matt, what do you think this book's about?
First of all, excellent dramatic reading.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
I don't know. I intentionally didn't look it up so that you could educate me about it.
So yeah, this is a really interesting little short story I had not read until I was preparing for this very episode. But essentially, the short story is about a group of people that are traveling somewhere. They get stuck due to rain, and they're all like two different families traveling, like get stuck in this area because it's been raining a lot. So they're all rent rooms in the same house. They find a woman renting another room in the house is playing records late at night and having various men over. She's a prostitute. And so one of the characters is a reverend, and he takes it upon himself to he's going to fix her. He's going to fix her from her evil ways. And to make a long story short, he ends up dead at the end of the short story, having sliced his own throat. And when they go to confront her about it, this is what she says. And it's the ending of this is supposed to kind of be ambiguous. It's like what actually happened here. So it allows you to kind of read into what do you think happened. Like, is the assumption that this man actually, in his attempts to turn this woman back from her evil ways, became infatuated with her, exercised that infatuation, and then the guilt of that sin drove him to commit suicide? Could be. The book doesn't actually tell you that definitively. Um, but essentially, this idea of there's this woman who was kind of doing things her own way, living her own way. Men are kind of flocking around her to try to fix her and tell her the right ways to behave, but also, succumbing to the very thing she's offering at the same time, because men are terrible hypocritic pigs. We're awful. We're awful.
Okay. All right. I wonder if that's going to be thematically resonant in any way.
I mean, I think just based off these first 8 chapters alone, we can say something we said already, which is that there is no good man in this story so far. We've
Yeah.
seen 8 chapters, and every male character of any species is presented to us as antagonistic to
Yeah.
our main female character.
Right. Although I would say importantly not just like purely like a purely evil demon, but a flawed person who is, as you said, antagonistic to our main character, and that's what's important.
Yeah, and I think that's where this story of Rain fits perfectly, is that this guy, like, if you believe the interpretation that I just read of the short story, is that this is a man who was both absolutely devoted to his convictions and morality, that this is a sin and a bad thing and this woman should not behave this way, because when he succumbed to it and succumbed to his baser manly nature, he punished himself for it. He would not let himself live as a hypocrite. He took his own life rather than do that. So that is a really interesting wrinkle on this thing. Like these men can be horribly monstrous, as we'll see in this story for sure. But they're also, unfortunately, just people as well.
Yeah. Right. So I think one comment I want to make here at the top is about the title.
Okay.
As we're kind of opening the book metaphorically, because this novel is almost entirely about Jessie.
Mhm.
Jessie is the main character, the protagonist, almost the only character. Gerald dies pretty much immediately, but it is Gerald's game. The novel is called Gerald's Game.
Yep.
And just by way of contrast, I'm going to list some other books: Dolores Claiborne, Carrie, Rose Madder, Lisi's Story, Holly, and then for the memes, Christine.
Okay, that doesn't
that doesn't really fit the pattern. The point is, King. It's interesting. It's interesting that the story isn't called Jessie or Jessie's Game or something like that. It's a story about Jessie, but I think in line with what we've just been talking about for the last 5 or 10 minutes, it's a story critically about how Jessie is trapped in Gerald's game in this, in this specific kinky roleplay scenario involving handcuffs, but also in the larger world of men's quote unquote games, the trap that is trying to exist, someone like her trying to exist in a man's world, a world made of these games, these elaborate enactments of violent fantasy and secret desire and so on. That's why it is called Gerald's Game.
Yep, I completely agree with that. I think you're right, and I think that's the perfect explanation there. And I think these are things I want us to keep in mind as we work our way through the novel, that like this is not just about Gerald. This is not just about the handcuffs that Jessie finds herself in. They are representative of a larger problem in both Jessie's life and et al. In the world that we live in.
Yep.
All right, chapter 1. Our novel opens on in bondage res. Is that a term?
That sounds like valid French to me.
Our protagonist, and essentially the only character in the story, is just being handcuffed to the bed by her husband, Gerald. Jesse, in this opening, isn't thinking really about the handcuffs, though, Matt, or the sex that awaits them in the opening of this book. Instead, she's thinking about the back door of their lake house, and I just love these opening words. Jesse could hear the back door banging lightly, randomly, in the October breeze blowing around the house. The jam always swelled in the fall, and you really had to give the door a yank to shut it. This time they had forgotten. She thought of telling Gerald to go back and shut the door before they got too involved, or that banging would drive her nuts. Then she thought how ridiculous that would be given the current circumstances. It would ruin the whole mood. What mood? A good question. That I love this opening, Matt. It sets up, I think, a lot of what is later to come. It is doing a lot of heavy lifting in defining what type of book we're in, what type of character this is, and kind of how the information of the novel will be doled out to us, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. It sets this pattern of the content of the novel essentially being just a flowing rapids of Jesse's perceptions and thoughts and reactions and
Yeah.
recursive self conversation. I mean, perfect right here. She's saying a good question that to her own question that she asked in her
Yeah.
own internal monologue,
Yeah.
which is just yeah, this is how this is going to be consistently.
It is so key to the functioning of this book that it and Jesse treats the various voices and characters in their heads as if they are just quite literally speaking to her, right? Like
Mm.
if King does a lot with voices and heads, as you mentioned in the intro, um, but he's never done it kind of so explicitly dialogue ish here.
Hmm.
That's a word I just made up, but like the book basically treats these voices in our heads as dialogue, and the book functions because it is a conversation between voices that aren't actually being spoken.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So we learn, Matt, that Gerald's game is this bondage we're having right here. It was introduced to them by Jerry to spice up their love life a little bit. Jesse was maybe a little bit into it at the beginning, but kind of quickly fell out of interest in it. But we see that Gerald sure is. He's really into it. We can see by the thing poking out of his underwear that he's wearing as he puts these handcuffs on.
Yeah. It's I think it kind of makes sense that the book is very, very clear about what its content is going to be immediately. Like I feel like on some level King wanted to make sure that people didn't start reading a book expecting some kind of, horror monster scenario and then they get pulled into it and then they subsequently feel blindsided by deeply uncomfortable psychosexual suffering and weird stuff like that. So basically he just starts the book with it. He's like, page one, this is a sex bondage scenario. You're either
Uh-huh.
in or you're out.
Yeah.
Uh, and of course, we're in because we're
Mm.
sickos. Um, uh, no, and so, more specific to what you were just talking about, I think the text is pretty clear that she was kind of into it when it was like scarves, that like tying her wrists with scarves, but it has escalated to steel handcuffs, which is not something that she's interested in. But apparently, Gerald, the scarves just weren't working for Gerald anymore. Which it's interesting what is left subtextual, right?
Yeah.
It never says quite what I just said there, where it's like Gerald needed this to be more scary and violent,
Mhm.
and you know. Uh, uh, and she definitely didn't, but she didn't say anything either. So
Yeah.
now we're here.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
I love that her kind of attraction and interest in it was almost entirely related to the idea that Gerald has not been this excited sexually about her in a while, right? So like going down this path and doing this stuff, like he's seen that he's more into her than he has been in a little bit,
mhm,
and that is kind of the part that she likes because it's like it's this everyone likes to feel wanted a little bit, right?
mhm.
And so that's the part that she was kind of vaguely interested in. But yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right that we're seeing this increasing trend of more and more serious, more and more violent, more and more uh, cold and unrelenting, switching from kerchiefs to steel. Yeah, and I think we should state here, like, you know, BDSM is a thing, right? And it's a thing that many people practice, and it's a thing that's completely fine as long as you do this very important thing of mutual consent. That is the most important thing, even if you're playing roles and acting like someone is threatening violence against you. It is under the umbrella of we are both consenting adults agreeing to do these things to each other, and if we really want out, we define safe words. So all this thing should exist in this kind of thing, and it's very clear from the very beginning that none of that exists in this arrangement at all.
Yeah, that's true. We don't talk about the concept of safe words or anything like that, but it's very clear immediately that she has no way of bailing out if she needs to.
Yeah,
Um,
and that's
yeah,
the first thing they should have talked about, and
yeah,
it's the reason why they haven't is because Gerald doesn't really want that. um
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
he's not really interested in actual BDSM. He just wants to control her.
Right.
Yeah. Um, I do find this opening writing really captivating though, because as we said, we're dropped in the middle of anything. We're still kind of learning who Jessie is, how she's gotten to this position. But like the descriptions of Gerald are just so immediate, and so you just have this perfect image of him almost immediately. Like, I love the idea of this wide grin that makes him look stupid, and then eventually, as things start to get more serious, psychotic. I really, really love this very clear image of him.
Yeah, it's funny how the description of, insane looking grin plus widow's peak just makes it really hard for me to not imagine Jack Nicholson.
Yeah, that's fair.
Uh, um, I mean, he's described as being, unattractive, in contrast to Bruce Greenwood, who is
Yeah, yeah.
a real silver fox, or whatever the word is for. Is that
I
the right
think
word?
that's the right. Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Bruce Greenwood, who plays Gerald in the movie, is a extremely attractive, incredibly in shape human being
yeah.
who gets to be in his boxers at the first 10 minutes of this movie, and looks amazing, especially for he's 68 now. This movie
Mhm.
came out, you know, almost a decade ago. So let's say he was a 58-year-old man. It's still fucking impressive. But yeah, that is not Gerald. Gerald is unattractive. Gerald is a little bit tubby, um, and very, very insecure.
And it's pretty clear that Jesse finds him to be gross and unattractive.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's well, I think we'll have a better opportunity to talk about that in a little bit, actually. So I'll pause there.
I do like that the book and Jesse make a point to differentiate between this grin that makes him look stupid and his smile, which is this kind of warm, good humored smile that reminds her of her father's smile, which won't matter at all at any point in the future of the book. Um, but I, I just think it's really interesting that like I think it is important that like there's going to be a lot of words put to page here that make Gerald sound like a disgusting piece of shit, and that's mostly because that's what he is. But I do think there has to be a little bit of work to understand like beyond the traumatic reasons that we'll get to as we go through the story, why was she with this person? And I think part of that has to be like, well, like there were parts of him. He had a really charming, warm smile that like lit up a room and people really liked, right? And so like that's a believable positive trait of someone, right?
Yeah, for sure. I think there's all these dichotomies in King and here too, right? I'm, even though it hasn't occurred yet in the book, I'm going to bring up our favorite dichotomy when it comes to sex and love. And
Oh,
I'm bringing it up because I'm predicting that we're going to get some red and pink color coding here,
okay.
because just, because this is partially a new audience, I'll mention the consistent pattern that King uses in like 90% of his novels is that red is basically code for romantic love, passionate romantic love, usually pure, usually worthy, higher self-love, and pink is usually code for sexual lust, um lower functions, just sex with no emotions attached, etc. And these color codings are kind of everywhere. We haven't seen it yet in this book, but the reason I bring it up is like we get to see a little bit of Gerald like he's a human being. He probably most of the time he's not thinking about bondage scenarios with his only mildly willing wife. He's probably living his life, and he probably feels a lot of like good, higher, happy feelings for his wife that aren't necessarily horribly violent and possessive. But
Sure.
also, he definitely has this pink here, the pink lust, uh, uh, possessiveness, seeing her as an object. Um, and that dichotomy is there. That's kind of my point.
I do think the book describes his skin as pinkish multiple
Oh,
times. So
yes, you're right.
yeah.
So I'm wrong. We do already have reference to pink. You're 100% right. He's repeatedly described as being fat and pink. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. For those that have read Dark Tower, the origin of this, and I promise I will say this without spoiling anything, but the origin of Matt's theory that I just continue to love is from Wizard and Glass. There is a pink stone in that book that has a very sexual effect on people that touch it, and of course the contrast to that is the red rose of the Dark Tower and what that represents. So just if you're wondering where the hell Matt got this stuff from, there it is, and go listen to Kingslingers.
Yeah. Well, and also, I mean, I think consistently he puts a lot of red and a lot of pink in his books. I don't think we're like making this up.
No,
So
no, I don't
anyway,
think so at
yeah,
all. No.
yeah.
So Jessie quickly decides that she's not really that interested in playing this particular game anymore, and she lets Gerald know, but she doesn't have a safe word, and he doesn't hear her or chooses not to hear her. Matt, I wanted to read this little part because it introduces us to our voices. So here we have, if that's the truth, Toots, how come he can't read you? How come he can't see this isn't just a new scene in the same old sex farce? Now it was her turn to frown slightly. She had always heard voices inside her head. She guessed everyone did, although people didn't usually talk about them, any more than they talked about their bowel functions, and most of them were old friends, as comfortable as bedroom slippers. This one, however, was new, and there was nothing comfortable about it. It was a strong voice, one that sounded young and vigorous. It also sounded impatient. So this is our introduction to one of her voices, who we will learn later is Ruth, her the voice of her friend from college. But I'm really fascinated by, once again, like, it's almost as if King sat down thinking about how he was going to make this particular story, this particular book work, and he was like, okay, voices in the head, but I can't just do voices in the head. I have to personify them. I have to characterize them. Like, even just the idea of making Ruth have this word toots that she implants in her is part of how the book is learning to let you recognize the speech patterns and differences between the different voices, as just how you can like navigate what the hell is going on. So he makes them characters. Like, I love the idea of, she hears this voice in her head and frowns, and Gerald is looking at her, and she's not frowning at him. She's not even thinking. Well, she is thinking about him, but like, she's reacting to a voice that she didn't actually hear. That is
Mhm.
her. It is all her, but is still reacting to it as if it's not.
Yeah, yeah. I agree. I love this. I think some people do have a greater or lesser degree of internal monologue, right, or even internal dialogue. But I think even if you don't necessarily have an internal dialogue in your mind, like your mind is made of parts that are, if not in literal dialogue, in some kind of metaphorical dialogue with each other. So I think we can all relate to this, and it feels genuine, even if this is not necessarily exactly how your mind works. I say this just because, like, partly it's a surprise that this works at all, because it's not like you sit there, deliberating between the different voices in your head, really, actually. But the book works perfectly fine because it's kind of leveraging the fact that, like, well, kind of metaphorically you are actually.
Yeah, I mean, I think it, like, and who knows? Nobody knows how anyone else's brain works, right? For sure.
Mhm.
But like, yeah, I think there are moments in my life when, like, I'm not hearing any particular like voice. It's just ideas and thoughts buzzing around in my head. But there are moments in my life where, like, I feel like there is narration happening. There is, like, when I'm thinking about things, it is being, not audibly, but like stated in a way with a voice, with a speech pattern, with like there are moments. It's not always, but there are moments. It's not. This is definitely that concept like turned up to 11. But I agree with you. I think anyone could read this and recognize just the truth of that a little bit in their
Yeah.
own lives.
Part of it, and this is just a thought, is that, Jesse is this character who I think, as we were going to see over the course of the book, is kind of a closed down, compartmentalized, somewhat dissociated person. And maybe the reason why she has this, cast of characters in her head has to do with the fact that she just has a lot of need for this compartmentalization. This,
Mhm.
having these different voices embody different parts of her is important, when it's really vital that this part over here never talks to this part over here.
Yeah.
Um, and again, that can be metaphorical, but here we're kind of literalizing it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely true. We've gotten a couple lines throughout these first chapters that say something to the effect of the voices started after some certain event that Jesse
Mm,
is refusing to acknowledge. So I think there is textual support for what you're saying being laid here. We'll see if that it plays out that way.
yeah, yeah. All right.
Despite Jesse's continued protest, though, Gerald, Carol, I'm going to call him Jerry because I feel like it's like, haha, fuck you. You're not even Gerald. You're Jerry. I work with a Jerry. So that's mean, though. I'm not going to do it anymore. Gerald continues on with this little game, drops his pants, and shows off his completely average penis. It's not small. It's just totally average. It's fine. I do love how she describes him as looking like some absurd gunslinger when he loops his thumbs in his underwear to take them off. Though, like, of course, the Dark Tower nut in me like perks my ears up every time I see the word gunslinger. But I just that image is so perfectly defined to me when King writes it that way.
Yeah, it definitely triggers a lot of imagery for us specifically.
Hmm, hmm. So Jessie considers following the advice of her other voice, the good wife Burlingham we see here, which is one of her other voices, who tells her to just lie there and take it, even though these games usually result in some pretty intense nightmares that she has after them. That's something that the text just kind of throws in there for us, that she's not really been enjoying this, but she's been doing it for a while, and every time she does it, she has horrible, horrible nightmares the night after, which, that's awful. And she's starting to feel a little bit more afraid than she normally does, and she finally works up the courage to tell Gerald off in a way that she knows will get his attention. She calls this whole thing stupid, and she says she looks ridiculous. And Matt, at first Gerald just pouts while still obviously not complying with her request to take off the handcuffs. And I love how we stop here and take a moment with Gerald where King kind of spends a few minutes to characterize him, like that this was someone that, was overweight as a kid, and was bullied a lot, and it's the result of this childhood is someone who, he got in shape eventually. He's kind of let himself go a little bit here in middle age, but he got in shape eventually, got a little bit of confidence, but there was still this kind of underlying, like at the core of him, this um lack of self-confidence, this anger at being the bullied fat kid. And she basically anytime she says stuff like that, I'm going to use the same kind of metaphor that she creates later. Like there's a poisoned well at the center of him somewhere,
Mm,
and when she does certain things, she dips into his well just like her well is dipped into.
mm.
um and so like he gets really like pouty and insecure.
Yeah, I like that metaphor. I mean, I like that because, yeah, it's like there's a lot of psychological complexity to this guy who we barely get to know before he croaks.
Hmm.
Although I kind of expect we're going to get to know him even after he's dead, in the sense that she's going to be reflecting on her life with him,
Sure.
um,
Yeah.
as we've kind of seen.
Hmm.
Yeah, I also just have to mention the tension and suspense of this first part of the book, because,
Yeah.
very quickly we understand that we are in kind of a anxious slow burn scenario. Even
Yeah.
if you haven't seen the movie, I think you can kind of see where this is going well before Jesse does. Not necessarily that Gerald's going to die imminently, but we can see before Jesse can see that he is going to semi willfully fail to take no for an answer
Yeah.
and push things well past where she's comfortable. And she isn't there yet. She's not. We're just a little bit ahead of her because I think there's a lot of self delusion in this character, so that
Yeah.
enables us to see a little bit ahead of where she sees
Uh-huh.
consistently, and so that creates a ton of tension.
Yeah, I mean, you're so right. There's so much tension here, and I think King does a really good job of just filling Gerald's dialogue with little bits of charged aggression that just make your skin kind of crawl and make you go, "Uh-oh." Like I love when he's talking about when he's pouting and talking about her, he's saying, "You're just so goddamn inconsistent, so goddamn sarcastic. I love you, Jess, but I hate that goddamn lip on you. I always have." And it's writing like that that makes you go, "Oh, fuck. Oh, fuck.
Mhm.
Get out of there. Oh wait, you're
Yeah.
already handcuffed. Fuck, 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 fuck." Yeah, I mean, it's dripping in everything he says and everything he does. The way like he kind of looks away from her when he's pouting, like he's like this metaphorically, he's not even, and literally he's not even seeing her, let
Mhm.
alone hearing her in those moments. And yeah, it's this feeling that it's interesting because like we're both dudes. I don't think either of us have ever been in a situation quite like this, right? But like
Mhm.
I am a large guy. Like I'm 6'2", I weigh over 200 pounds. Um, People don't generally like trap me places against my will, like just
Mhm.
in general. Um, if I want out, if I want someone off of me, I can I can usually just make that happen if I want
Mhm.
to. And so I'm not used to this feeling of powerlessness that Jesse is feeling in this moment. But I think, and I think importantly, Stephen King is also a very tall, very big guy, right? So I think he probably is similar in that regard. He has not felt those specific feelings very often, but I think it is a testament to the writing that he perfectly gets me to feel what that must feel like. Because yeah, like this is not a feeling I have acutely felt myself before, but like the book makes me feel it for Jesse immediately, and I can feel it, and yeah, it's very very uncomfortable, very tense for sure.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if that was an explicit goal of his with this book
Hmm.
because like you said, I mean, and I've heard this before just in general that like men just essentially live in a different world when we're walking the streets.
Yeah,
We just like we can afford to just be lost in our thoughts. Nobody's going to mess with us, right? Like
yeah,
and that's not the same for someone who weighs 70 pounds less and a foot
yeah.
shorter, and it's just not. It's a different world, right? And
Yeah,
that
I
is
go
it's
running at night all the time, and I don't even really think about it beyond just this is the time I had to go for a run. Yeah,
and there's very few occasions when you even think about what it would be like for it to be otherwise.
yeah,
Like that doesn't even occur to me. So
yeah,
it's good to be reminded, I guess.
definitely. And I think I don't have like the data to back this up. I think there are quite a few women that read Stephen King. I think that's definitely true. We've met a bunch of them, and our audience is pretty well split. But I think generally probably more men that read Stephen King than women. So you can definitely see this as like I know who my audience is, and I'm going to specifically try to get my primarily male audience into a mindset that they perhaps have never experienced before.
Interesting. I actually wonder what the statistics are because
I could be completely wrong.
I have no idea. Yeah, I think most readers are women
That
actually,
is
full
true.
stop.
That is
But
true. Yeah,
I
A-
just actually have no idea. Anyway,
and I will say that like there's so many stories I hear from King people that like it was their mother, not their father, that got them into Stephen King. So I could just be talking completely out of my ass, but um, regardless, I do think you're right that this is intentional.
yep.
So Jesse, this time, that being ignored turns her into anger, and that anger reminds her of how mad she got when her brother goosed her when they were little and laughed about it. And I think this is a term that King uses often in his writing. And if you haven't read a lot of King or just never bothered to actually Google what that means, Um, it's poking somebody in the asshole. That's what goosing is. It's just sticking your finger between their butt cheeks. Maybe not actually into the asshole, but it's sticking your finger into between someone's butt cheeks.
Uh-huh.
Um, that's yeah, just like a totally cool, normal, fun. Just gotcha, gotcha.
So you can make fun of me, but you congratulate me also because I get to learn a word today. Because I actually genuinely my whole life until this day always thought that goose just meant like you kind of come up behind somebody and you kind of grab them, startle them, all in good fun.
Yeah.
Did not know the ass focused nature of goosing
I, I
until
definitely
until
knew
today.
I definitely knew it was butt focused, but I think when I was younger, I thought it was just like, you're poking someone's cheek or like hitting
Uh-huh.
them on the cheek or that kind of thing. No, no, no. You're going in the crack there.
Yeah.
It's crack focused. So if that helps you get an image of what this is and why perhaps Jesse would be so freaking angry about it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it also seems like she's primed to be especially angry about it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, this is the metaphor about the well. I want to read this real quick. But he's only been 9 himself, 9 that day. And at that age, all kids were stupid. No, it hadn't been his stupidity. It had been her fear. Fear that if she didn't do something with that ugly green froth of anger and embarrassment, it would put out the sun, cause her to explode. The truth, first encountered on that day, was this: there was a well inside her. The water in that well was poisoned, and when he goosed her, William had sent a bucket down there, one which had come up filled with scum and squirming gluck. She had hated him for that, and she supposed that it was really her hate which had caused her to strike out. That deep stuff had scarred her. Now, all these years later, she was discovering it still did, but it still infuriated her as well. I just love the writing there. I love, like the poisoned the well metaphor is something that is used a lot, but like the well in this case is her. That at the center of her there is this rot. There is this poison. There's this brokenness, and as you said, she has compartmentalized it away. Right? She has locked that part away, and it is only certain things that cause that bucket to go down and pick up some of that poison.
Yeah.
And her brother doing that to her was one of them, and Gerald right here, right again, is dipping that bucket in that well once again.
And I think you could argue that we see it kind of leaking out over the course of these chapters. For example, when she does the sort of self relaxation protocol and starts to have this like litany of self disgust and self criticism, I feel like
Yeah.
that's connected to this well, because the well fundamentally is like the text says here, it's embarrassment. It's a froth of anger and embarrassment.
Yeah.
Like I think I really focused on those are the words that are central to like what is the nature of this wound, this whatever it is that's inside her, anger and embarrassment. And I think that creates a sense of self-loathing.
Yeah.
Um, so
Yeah, definitely. So the result here is Jesse lashes out and yells at Gerald and says, "Stop it." She threatens divorce. She says everything she possibly can. But Gerald is excited, and the resistance that she's putting up excites him even more. He decides that Jesse is just acting, that this is all part of the game, and so he starts pinching her nipples and spreading her legs. I love this moment. It kind of crystallizes everything this book is going to be about when Jesse suddenly realizes, oh, he knows. He knows I'm not acting. He knows this is not just pretend. He knows, and he just is pretending not to.
mhm.
Um, and I don't think there's anything in the book that leads you to believe that Jesse's like mistaken in this idea, that like this is just unreliable narrator stuff, that she's just decided this and it's not actually true. I just believe it. I just believe that he is mad, he's horny, he's turned on, and he knows that she's being serious, but he knows he has a shield of, even if he does this afterwards, he'll just say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I thought you were just playing," and
Right.
nothing will happen.
I'm not going to argue with you. Certainly, I kind of see it as a kind of double think where he kind of simultaneously knows and doesn't know, which,
Yeah.
you know, is a contradiction, obviously, but I think human beings are capable of these contradictions of lying to ourselves.
Yeah. I think that's a good point. I don't think there is a voice, there is an active, characterized voice in his head saying, she's telling the truth, she's not acting, I'm gonna rape her. Like I don't think that's how his brain is working right now. I agree with that. I think on some level he does know, but he's choosing not to care.
You see, yeah, I think we're on the same page where it's not like this mitigates his culpability, and he's definitely completely full of shit. It's just from the inside, I think it's a more accurate picture of his state of mind to say he's choosing to be dumber than he is. You know,
Yeah. Mhm.
it's interesting because the book doesn't actually dip into his head, so it's really just a statement about like what kind of guy is this, and I think honestly, it's just more interesting and I think more valuable as a s- window into the psyche of humankind to say, no, this isn't a monster. This isn't an unusually bad man. This is a normally bad man
Yeah.
who is capable of extremely horrible things through sort of mental sleight of hand.
Yeah. No, I think I like that. Because I think the idea that, yeah, the idea that like there are easily identifiable monsters roaming around out there is, I think the point is that the people that will do these terrible things to you look just like any other guy.
Yeah,
You can't pick them out off the street. You can't recognize them. It's. I think that is like most rapists out there are not like serial, like prowling on you in the dark type rapists, right?
right,
They're people that are otherwise, normal human beings existing in their life, but are for some reason capable of doing this absolutely terrible thing.
right, exactly.
Yeah. Um, so yeah, Jesse, to kind of increase the horror of this whole thing, Jesse's like contemplating just letting him do it anyway, just like letting him do it and get over with it. And then she thinks about the divorce court testimony later, and where she has to explain to someone in authority why she came up here with him, why she just let him do it, why she did all these things, and then also why she really didn't have consent, and just like knowing that she would not be believed, that they would look at her as if she did something wrong. Like once again, King is, I think, really really doing an excellent job of capturing just this central problem with rape and the reporting of rape and the prosecuting of rape in our world right now, is that like these questions that she's positing will be asked of her and she'll have to explain in her head are not only things that go through women's heads when they're dealing with these things, but really happen in our systems, right?
Yeah,
So like this book is over 30 years old now, but like we're still feeling the same problems with all of this today.
yep, absolutely.
All right, but that strong-willed voice, Matt, encourages her that she can't just sit here and take it. She has to do something. She has to fight back. So Jessie strikes out. Literally, she kicks Gerald in the stomach and the balls. And I just want to say, a book has done a very good job at like making you hate someone when I kind of only sort of reflexively pity them for
Uh-huh.
getting kicked really hard in the balls, just a little bit. I
Yeah.
can never fully turn it off because, ow. Um, but it was just that little bit.
Yeah, you're like, "Oh, but he deserved it."
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Gerald screams, grabs his balls, and then his heart, and then he falls backwards off the bed, cracking his head on the hard floor below. He's dead, Matt. Oh no.
Yeah. Um, minor point, but, it's not Viagra, it's just his ticker probably wasn't doing too good already,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
he got kicked in the balls, and it made his whole, system freak out, and that was it. It didn't take much.
Yeah. That's how much it hurts. Definitely worse than childbirth, right, Matt?
It's definitely worse than childbirth.
All right, chapter 2. We enter this chapter with Jessie finding herself in a long, spooky hallway of unconsciousness as a barking dog, more on him later, slowly wakes her up. She wakes up in pain with her muscles strained from lying in the handcuffs. And we see, Matt, the first thing we get in this chapter is in this post faint clarity, Jessie suddenly places that new voice she heard. It's her old college roommate, Ruth Neary, a dyed in the wool feminist freedom fighter. I think Ruth Neary, the way the book describes her, I don't know if you feel this way, but like you just kind of immediately know who she is, right? Like I think everyone's kind of know if you went to college, especially, I think everyone's kind of known a Ruth Neary type and had them in their lives at some point. This is like just an incredibly strong-willed person who was very opinionated and was never afraid to share their opinions on anything and everything, and not just share them but like act upon them. That was always going to be, they were going to go to the protest, they were going to, like they were just this person, this kind of force of a person. And if you're someone that's a little more quiet, a little more reserved, they're the type of person you can get swept up in, right? You just kind of
Mhm.
want to be in their orbit because they seem so smart and strong-willed about everything. And I think you also kind of eventually outgrow that type of person. Like if you get swept up in their orbit, you kind of eventually find yourself kind of traveling to other solar systems away from them.
Uh-huh.
But I don't know. I just think the book did a really good job of making you understand exactly who she is.
Yeah, and I think we see basically like you just said that Jesse's the kind of person who would find that attractive, um, and I don't mean that in the romantic sense. I mean like to
Sure.
be, you know, magnetically attracted to a personality like that who's very very strong and forthright and agentic, because Jesse kind of seems like the opposite of those things.
Yeah.
Not kinda. I mean, she's characterized as being someone who found herself in this situation literally because she didn't want to rock the boat. She didn't want to start an argument with her husband. And it just kind of seems like her life has been a series of similar decisions.
Yeah. And it's really great that, Jesse here we learn hasn't seen Ruth in over a decade, hasn't thought about her in years, but here she is, right? I mean, it's saying something that in this moment, as she sat in this bed handcuffed to it, even before Gerald died, here she is, come
Hmm.
to help it. This is the way Jesse has chosen to personify a portion of herself, right? Because yes, like Ruth is characterized, and Ruth matches the character that Jesse tells the story of from her youth. But like Ruth is Jesse. I think there's something we have to, as we really dive into who these characters are and how they're personified by the book out of necessity to like make this a compelling story. We do have to continue to go back to the central idea that every word coming out of these people is Jesse, is a part of who Jesse is, a part of her personality and her strength and her weaknesses and all of these things. It's all her, right?
Yeah. So, in other words, we're seeing her beginning to reach some kind of tipping point with her willingness to go along to get along.
Yeah. Yep.
And it unfortunately happened like 30 seconds too late, but here we are.
Hmm. All right, so I really love this description of kind of her struggle right now. Her forearms were buzzing, and the tingles of sensation had at last spread into her fingers as well. Jessie rolled her hands open and closed several times, wincing as she did so. She could hear the faint sound of the handcuff chains rattling against the bedpost, and took a moment to wonder if she and Gerald had been mad. It certainly seems so now, although she had no doubt that thousands of people all over the world played similar games each and every day. I just love that, like as the feeling returns to her hands, as she kind of adjusts because she was just hanging uncomfortably on the chains, and she's just like, "This is crazy.
Mhm.
This is crazy. The situation I've gotten myself in."
Yeah, when you kind of look at it in the cold light of dawn, it does seem crazy to handcuff yourself to something and not have the key within hand's reach. But a lot of human sexual behavior is absurd and ridiculous.
Yeah.
So, you know,
Well, and a lot of handcuffs that are made are like, you go to a store and you buy handcuffs, they're going to be the handcuffs that have that release lever on the
yeah,
side, right? Like they function as perfect handcuffs, but you can also just press a button and it unlock. You don't need the key, and unlocks the things, right?
Yeah.
And most handcuffs, I think, used in a sexual situation like this would behave like that for exactly these problems. But that's not what Gerald wanted, right? Gerald wanted real handcuffs because he wanted it to feel as close to real as possible. That she was
Hmm.
really trapped. There was really no way she could get out, and he was really completely in control.
Yeah.
And so here we are.
Exactly.
So after the panic attack and resulting Charlie horse that Jessie gets after really at first realizing her problem, she takes stock of her situation. Gerald is dead. There's no one around for Miles this late in the season. It's October, so it's like end of season. They're at a lake house, right, and no one else is around. The closest person is a man running a chainsaw that she's heard, but he could be miles away. And even if he wasn't miles away, probably couldn't hear her yelling anyway. And part of her wonders if she deserves this for the part she played in Gerald's death. And fortunately, Ruth is here to call bullshit on that little idea.
Yeah, right. I mean, I don't think there's any moral case for her being like culpable. If any, the basic idea is, I feel like he was going to be dead very soon, regardless if his heart was in that kind of shape.
Yeah,
Um,
if it wasn't the kick to the balls, maybe even just having sex would have
yeah,
pushed his heart over the edge.
exactly. Um, you mentioned the panic attack in here, and I appreciated how it actually took a really long time for Jesse's internal dialogue to work its way around to actually panicking, because her predicament is obvious. Again, her predicament is obvious to us before the emotional reality of it has really sunk in with her. And I find this really realistic. If you've ever been in a situation that was, you suddenly realize, oh shit, that's bad. Usually the fear, or whatever emotion it is kind of lags the analysis. That's what I
Sure.
find anyway. It's only after the analysis has well and truly sunk in that you actually have the appropriate emotional reaction. So I just really appreciate that. And then just kind of holistically up till this point in the story, it's felt like this very deeply accurate portrait of the stages that you go through psychologically when you're in a situation like this. And it's like, yeah, I've never been in a situation like this, but what I mean is a situation where you suddenly realize that things are way shittier than you thought,
Hmm.
and you're like, uh-oh, oh shit,
Yeah.
uh-oh, uh-oh. That's what I find to be is like perfectly captured here.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. It's like it just there's a lag there, especially when like your husband dies in front of you. So like
Hmm.
you're still kind of reeling to catch up with everything that's actually going on.
Right.
I really love how this chapter ends, by the way. So it says, so what exactly had she expected from this man? For him to say, yes, dear, I will free you at once. And by the way, thanks for raising my consciousness. Yes. She suspected some naive part of her, some untouched and dewy eyed little girl part had expected just that. And this is so perfect because, like, basically, she's like, this guy never listened to me, was really in his own little world, never really seemed to care what I think. So what was I thinking? Was I expecting him to just listen to me this time? And it's like her level of expectation for men is so in the dirt that she calls it naive and dewy-eyed to expect when someone has handcuffed you to a bed, you to say, "Hey, please don't handcuff me to the bed." Expecting them to go, okay, is like naive and stupid, right?
Uh,
Like that is a perfect image of just how warped she has been by the men in her life. That
yeah.
like yes, obviously if someone professes to love you and is married to you and says take off the fucking handcuffs, it's not naive for you to expect them to take the fucking handcuffs off.
Uh-huh.
That's just like basic humanity. But of
Yeah.
course, like she like just has just the men in her life have warped her so much that like she looks at that and was like, yeah, that was stupid and naive of me to actually expect him to do that.
You're right. I didn't think about it that way. I didn't dig into that line so much, but you're right. That's very dark and kind of depressing.
It certainly is. All right, Matt, chapter 3. Once again, starting to feel the panic coming on, Jessie begins to count to 10 in the manner one of her therapists, Nora Callaghan, had taught her, starting from her toes and counting her body parts one by one. But Jessie is not just counting these areas, Matt. She's criticizing them. I do really like, I just want to read how she describes her vagina because I think this is really, really fascinating. What lay between her hips was a triangle of ginger-colored, crinkly hair surrounding an unassuming slit with all the aesthetic beauty of a badly healed scar. This thing, this organ that was really little more than a deep fold of flesh cradled by crisscrossing belts of muscle, seemed to her an unlikely wellspring for myth, but it certainly held a mythic status in the collective male mind. It was the magic veil, wasn't it? The corral where even the wildest unicorns were eventually penned. I don't know. The word usage there is just fascinating to me. I just like nothing more than a deep fold of flesh cradled by crisscrossing belts of muscle.
Yeah. Um, Crisscrossing belts of muscle gives a sense of confinement. The word
Yeah.
penned, the unicorns being penned, consistent language of confinement, captivity,
Mhm.
subjugation. Clear, almost at the risk of repeating myself, she has this extremely, self-loathing, negative self-image, self-hatred, and sense of everything in her life, including her own physical body, are a kind of, well, uh, handcuffs.
Yeah.
Um, so never put that together actually.
I
Yeah.
love that. I love
It's
that.
it's 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 all like this is her world actually. Like the
Yeah.
fact that she's chained to the bed is just the physical instantiation of the way that she's felt her whole life.
Yeah. I like an unassuming slit with all the aesthetic beauty of a badly healed scar is
Yeah.
such negative, like powerfully negative language. Like she looks at this one of the most important organs of our body for like the continued survival of our species and sees nothing but disgust. And that is
Yeah.
absolutely saying something.
It is kind of funny to remember that it's Stephen King writing this.
Yes.
This is the most unflattering depiction of a vulva ever written by a man. Um,
True.
but no, it's. I agree. I think the language feels very honed. Actually, like it
Yeah.
feels like every word here is weighed and measured. Actually,
Hmm. Eventually, as she moves on to her two wide shoulders and chicken neck, the Ruth voice finally protests to end all these things, asking who the hell turned this good counting list game into a quote mantra of self hate. Jessie tries to blame the good wife Burlingame, but that's not exactly true, right? I love the line here. Who was the one, Jessie, who taught you that you were ugly and worthless, who picked out Gerald Burlingame as your soulmate and Prince Charming? Probably years before you actually met him at that Republican Party mixer. Who decided he wasn't only what you needed, but is exactly what you deserved? Of course, that question is left open ended, right?
hmm
So Jessie
yeah,
counts again, this time successfully, and manages to calm herself again and opens her eyes and takes in her situations. While the clock is out, and she can tell by this band of light coming in from the window that it's a little bit after 4. And this, I love that idea that like the band is going to get smaller and smaller and move as the darkness comes. And this idea of having to spend the night in this room with the body of her husband is just kind of terrifying.
hmm yeah. It builds from that anxiety earlier through panic and now into dread. Um, what a what an idea! What a concept for a novel. Like we're just gonna sit with this woman as this all plays out. I it's just remarkable. Like and it works so well. Like I
Yeah.
just just stepping back from it, like you see where we are and where we're heading, and it's like you're gripped with horror, and it's such a simple idea, you know.
Mhm.
There's no monster dog that's gonna, you know, well, there's a dog actually. I was thinking about Cujo. Like there's no immediate like threat, right? But you're still filled with dread at just the thought of like the hours ahead, you know. Anyway.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. One thing I really love that King does to kind of paint our scene as Jessie looks around is she sees a painting on the far wall and learns that the painting was actually done by Ruth, a gift from Ruth. And then right next to the painting is this fraternity stein that Gerald has hung. It's something he has his like first beer of the season out of every year, and it's this perfect like looking in front of her as she's trapped on this bed. This like two sides of her essentially.
Mhm.
I just really love that.
Yeah, me too. Those are some fun symbols. I wonder if they will kind of come into play later as symbols. We'll see.
Hmm. Yeah. So Matt, it's kind of hard to play coy here since I know you know the general story of this book, right? But so Jessie clearly has some dark memory in her past, right? That has
Mhm.
quote poisoned her will to contribute to her own metaphor, and this event, as we see early in the book, kind of tries to creep its way back into her mind, but she's kind of expertly batting it away each time it does. We learn it has something to do with Dark Score Lake, the lake she used to travel to each summer with her family. The ninth largest lake in Maine, by the way. It's not real. It's not a real lake.
Yeah, it's the name sounds way too badass to be a
Yep.
real place.
There is apparently a Dark Score Lake in Maine, but it's like a little puddle creek. It's
Oh,
definitely not the
okay.
ninth largest lake in Maine.
Gotcha.
Yeah. But I just like I wanted to acknowledge this because I think the book it feels weird to just like try to ignore it because you and I both know where the story is going and the other readers might not. But like it, it's here, right? Like
Mhm.
there's continual references to something that happened. The book kind of creates this frame around it that has something to do when she was a child. It has something to do with Dark Score Lake. It has something to do with when the voices started, and it is something that Jessie is actively like attacking and ripping out of her head every single time it threatens to pop up.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, again, I guess we're not gonna say explicitly what this thing is that we know, but,
No.
I do think that even if you hadn't watched the movie, clearly this is there's telegraphing happening. You
Yeah.
know, pay attention to this thing that she keeps thinking about, and then like rushing to brush under the rug. That's important. You are watching the thought processes of a person who has a lifetime of practice thinking around something
Yep.
and compartmentalizing it away.
Absolutely. Um, and as we reach here the end of chapter 3, I do just want to say nothing's happened in this
Mhm.
book, right? This is the remarkable thing about this book, and I think you just said it a slightly different way a couple minutes ago, but like Gerald dies in the opening 10 pages of the novel, essentially. And then from there till now, nothing has happened. She's
Mhm.
just been sitting here trying to like mentally focus. She hasn't even really like started to try to escape from the handcuffs yet at this point.
Mm.
And yet, it's all so fucking captivating, man. Like this
Yeah.
is such a page turner of a book.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
Totally. It's downright bizarre. I agree.
It's just a testament to the skill of the writing and the characterization, and like we're just so invested in this just right away.
Yep.
All right. So speaking of which, though, chapter 4 begins with Jessie really trying to take her first steps to solve her problem. She first tries to slip her hands out of the cuffs, but quickly finds that that's a no-go. She also kind of very quickly finds that she can't slip the cuffs off the bedpost either, that both sides of those handcuffs are pretty firmly rooted in their position and they're not going anywhere. I do like King takes all these moments, and this is part of the reason, by the way, why this book is so captivating, is because it's not enough for King to just say, okay, I tried to slip them off my hands, it didn't work, and then I tried to slip them off the bedpost. As Jessie is dealing with the bedpost, she thinks about the bed. She thinks about this as a bed that she fits on that is really too small for them both to sleep on, but that's not a problem because they don't sleep in the same beds and haven't done so for a while. They meet together in a bed to have sex, and then she goes off and sleeps in her own bed. And I love kind of the reveal of this and also the reveal of why, right? Because at first she says to Gerald that it's because of his snoring, but it's not his snoring, Matt. It's his smell. It's the smell that permeates out of him. And she says it's the smell of Scotch whiskey beginning to creep out of him, even if he takes a shower before bedtime. But man, um, like I think I don't know about you, but like to me, smell is sometimes so tightly tied with like a feeling of love and affection.
Mm.
Like you know, if I haven't seen my wife in a while and I get a big hug and I like as you're hugging someone, like you smell them and it's like, oh yeah, that's her. That's that
Mhm.
smell, and I have a lot of emotion attached to that smell. So I think it is very powerful to say that she can't stand the smell of him anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's sad, really.
Hmm.
It's once again, I think, an indication of how thoroughly compartmentalized her mind is because she's basically thinking right here, like, my husband is extremely disgusting. The thought of sleeping next to him and smelling his gross body makes me physically nauseous. But then simultaneously, she's gone along with the bondage games for months at this point
Yeah,
and not not even really acknowledged to herself, like, I kind of find my husband to be physically repulsive. Um,
yeah. There's so much pressure in like our culture creates so much pressure in marriage around sex, like it just it's so interesting that like the the stereotypes are the dude wants to do it all the time when you're married and the woman never wants to do it. And so like it's really funny that the stereotype can have the opposite effect where it puts pressure on women to feel like they have to because they don't want to be in that kind of relationship. I don't want to be in a relationship where my husband always wants to have sex and I never want to have sex, and so every time I don't feel like it, I'm going to do it anyway because I don't want to be in that type of marriage. I don't want to be in that. There's so much like pressure, like cultural and sociological to like do things and to be certain ways. And so like my point here is that you can absolutely see this person who yes, as you just said,
yeah,
like is disgusted by this person but also just constantly feels this pull and this need to live up to her part of the bargain of marriage, right?
yeah,
um
totally.
so fucking complicated.
Yeah, I think it's a huge source of, like, suffering in most people's lives is
Yeah,
all of the, like, contradictory and impossible to meet expectations
yeah,
around all of this.
yeah, just fucking communicate with each other, folks.
Yeah.
I also, Matt, really love this wrinkle. I think this is actually sneakily really important, and I think it fits into something we were talking about before. That Jesse has this realization that over time, Gerald's game has been slowly ramping up. That like we already mentioned this. He starts with like this, we're just tying hands with scarves, and it's slowly started to ramp up. But for some reason, Gerald has never played the game or insisted they play the game here at the lake house. And Jesse's kind of guess at that, at the reason why, is that on some level, Gerald was perhaps afraid of himself and afraid that if we came out here and did it out here, some control would be lost. That
Mhm.
when we're out in the middle of nowhere, there's not a chance anyone's going to stumble upon us. That I that perhaps this part of me that I've been keeping locked away, keeping under wraps, would break free, and I would do something that I would regret. And I think that's really important, right? He is, as you said, he's not a monster, right? Like he's not a. I don't want to be like he's not a great guy, right? He's a guy who is about to become a rapist. Like that's not a great person, but he's got multiple levels to him, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we want to articulate it this way because if you just write a person off as a monster, then that sort of means like, oh, well, so I don't need to worry because I'm not a monster. And it's like, no, 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 that's It's exactly the wrong point. The point
Yep.
is that we all have darkness. Um, and
Yeah.
yeah, so yeah, I like that.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
exhausted. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, like, sprinkled throughout this, she does remember moments of good things, good times, right?
Yeah.
And like times when her husband was maybe just an unambiguously good guy, did something good, was kind.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that's important. I think it's actually important, and it makes the whole situation feel more real and more human. That she is, it intermingled with this horrible situation she's in. She's also feeling these like spurts of actual mourning, actual grief
Yeah.
beginning to take shape.
Yeah, I agree. And to be clear here, like none of this is to say, oh, you shouldn't have kicked him in the balls and you shouldn't have left him and left this clearly trending towards abusive relationship. Like we're not saying that, right? We're just merely saying that the the book is doing a good job as painting this person as just more than just this one thing and this one
Right.
event,
Right.
which makes him feel more of a real person. Yeah.
Yeah.
So exhausted by all the options she can think of, Jessie screams. What is she going to do? And she's answered by dog bark, Matt, a very, very close dog bark. And that's when we move into chapter 5 and enter dog. Here
Yep.
we go.
Main character arrives.
Yep. Now we love dogs here at Flanagan's Wake, and in a better world, this is a real Lassie situation, right? Where the dog runs in and says, "Oh no, I'll go get help," and then goes and barks and brings a little, I don't know, Timmy. I
Yeah.
haven't watched Lassie in a long time.
It's probably Timmy, we can safely assume.
Oh no, girl trapped in a bed. Okay, boy, let's go. Um, that is not this this story.
Yeah. I still like this dog though. This is a good dog.
The book does a lot of work to make you sympathize with the man-eating dog.
Well, it's the difference between a man eating dog and a man killing dog. I'm gonna you know I'm gonna die on this hill. This
Okay,
is
I
a man
mean,
eating dog, not a man killing dog.
sure. Do you want to draw that line between like a man-eating human and a man-killing human? Do you want to really draw that line?
Um I'll think about that one. That's a good one.
Oh, so we need to think about it. Okay.
Yeah.
Look, he might be a man eater, but at least he's not a man killer. I
Yeah.
feel like all man eaters are man killers in waiting. That's what I'm going to say.
Interesting. I
If you
guess
get
we'll
the
see.
taste for man flesh, eventually you're going to want to kill a man.
I guess we'll have to run a series of tests on some dogs.
Oh, that's
Find out.
troubling. So Jessie calls for help, but of course, nothing responds. And despondent, she decides she's just going to take a nap. Because, yeah, I mean, I really sympathize with that. Like, have you ever just like been walking around your house and like, you know what? I don't know what to do. I'm just going to go take a nap.
Yeah, all the time.
That was pre-children, though. So
That's true. Yeah.
and then right before she falls asleep, though, we get this. When the wind gusted this time, it seemed distant, and the restless sound of the door was even farther away. Bang, 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 bang. Her breathing, which had deepened and slowing as she slipped into a doze, suddenly stopped. Her eyes sprang open. The only emotion she was aware of in the first moment of sleep snatched away disorientation was a kind of puzzled peek. She had almost made it, damn it. And then that damn door. What about that damn door? Just what about it? The damn door hadn't finished its usual double bang. That was what what about it. Matt, come on, man. That writing.
No,
The
it's
dog
great.
entered the house. No,
Yeah.
no. Bang, 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 bang,
Yeah.
bang. Ah, ah.
Ugh. It's great. Incredibly creepy and riveting. Multiple paragraphs of writing for what is literally just the sound of a door not closing,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
the implications of that.
Well, and this is the kind of the closed circle that of what we began with in the first chapter, right? The banging door was the first thing we see her hear as this book opens.
Hmm.
And now, why is that a problem? Well, because here comes a stray dog.
Yep.
So
The banging door is just a great like device, by the way.
yeah,
Just
yeah,
yeah. Anyway.
it's perfect, and he uses it like he came up with the idea, and then because it almost doesn't like essentially what has happened is the dog has entered the house and the door while swinging back has hit the dog, right?
Right.
Like he's
Right.
halfway through the threshold and the door hits him and the dog doesn't
Yeah.
run. Like it almost doesn't make sense, but on some level it makes perfect sense.
Sure. Yeah. I kind of imagined the dog kind of like waiting for it to edge open a bit and then like sticking its nose in there. And then
Hmm.
as the dog is kind of squirming through, there's not any banging happening.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
once the dog is through, it resumes kind of its normal pattern.
Yes. Yes. Um, so the dog has entered. She hears its claws on linoleum, and Jessie yells to scare it away. But we move on to chapter 6, which opens. She hadn't scared it away.
Hmm.
Which is a perfect way to start our chapter. And then Matt, we cut to this like short 2-page chapter that is from the perspective of the dog here. This is the dog we meet. His name is Prince. He's starving and he's just caught a whiff of something that he just can't ignore, which of course is
Yeah.
Gerald.
Yeah. Man flesh.
Yeah.
Um, so Prince, we're making it real clear this is a male dog because
Yep.
Prince is a highly gendered name. Uh, a dog who literally thinks of describes Jessie as a bitch master,
Yeah.
which is admittedly kind of funny, but also just a very intentional note of misogyny. Like, okay, the
Hmm.
dog is not being a misogynist. That's
Yeah,
not what
no,
I'm
it is. It's
saying.
a total fucking misogynist dog. Fuck this dog.
It would. To be clear, when the dog is thinking bitch, it's just thinking female. But this, it's a novel, so everything is intentional. So the fact that we're using the word bitch to describe a woman, even if it's inside the dog's mind, it's like tied with this idea of that being an inherently misogynistic word.
I You are 100% correct, and I love that you pointed this out, but also it's the sentence when the dog is thinking bitch, the dog is just thinking female is an amazing thing that you just had to say,
When
and
the
I
dog is
love it.
thinking the word bitch in its internal monologue, yes. No, okay. You everyone knows what I mean.
Yes, they do.
Yes.
Yes.
So yeah. Anyway, all dogs, all Jesse's persecutors are male. The dog, kind of like Gerald, is pursuing its physical needs. In this case, hunger. Obviously, not anything else. But too bad for her if she objects or gets in the way of it satisfying its physical needs. We
Yep.
have. We don't blame the dog. The dog is just dogging. It is being a dog, and yet it has come into cross purposes with Jesse.
Just another fucking man trying to keep her down.
Yep.
Men. All right, chapter 7. The dog slowly arrives in the room and stands in the doorway. Jessie yells as it to go away, but of course it doesn't. It can hear the fear in her voice, and its hunger is overpowering its own fear. And Matt, King takes a second here, and I think this is important. This is very important. We get to see where poor Prince came from. And that's where we learn that Prince being here is the fault of another man.
Oh my
This
God.
is this is Charles Sutland, a lawyer from Massachusetts who is out here in Maine for the summer. He picked up a puppy on a lark as a gift for his daughter, and we learn that rather than pay the combined state and town dog tax of $70 in Massachusetts, Charles Sutland decided to just abandon the dog into the wilderness. Yeah, okay, so sure, I just bought a giant new boat, but like it's just a stupid mutt dog. He actually described it as a Heinz 57. Did you see that? I actually
Uh,
didn't know that that was like a slang term for like a mixed breed dog is like a Heinz 57 because I guess there's like 57 varieties or things. I don't know. I never heard it before. I looked it up because I didn't know what the hell the book was talking about, but that's what it means.
no, I never heard that phrase either.
Yeah. So I want to read this and then we can talk about how much this guy sucks. A dog like Prince wouldn't be happy in a kennel anyway. He would be happier running wild with the whole North Woods for his kingdom. Yes, Sutland had told himself on that last day of August as he parked on a deserted stretch of Bay Lane and then coaxed the dog out of the back seat. Old Prince had the heart of a happy wanderer. You only had to take a good close look at him to see that. Sutland wasn't a stupid man, and part of him knew that this was self serving bullshit. But part of him was also exalted by the idea of it. And as he got back into his car and drove off, leaving Prince standing at the side of the road and looking after him, he was whistling the theme from Born Free, occasionally bursting into a snatch of the lyrics: Born free to follow your heart. He had slept well that night, not sparing the thought for Prince, soon to be the former Prince, who spent the same night curled up beneath a fallen tree, shivering and wakeful and hungry, whining with fear each time an owl hooted or an animal moved in the woods. Yeah, fuck this guy, right?
Yeah. I think this double think thing is a theme, actually,
Yeah, yeah,
where he he has this romantic notion of what he's about to do, and at the same time, part of him is aware that this is all bullshit.
yeah.
I mean, it's compartmentalization, which is the same thing that's happening to Jesse. I think we're actually repeatedly emphasizing this idea that like people they cut themselves into pieces to avoid having to acknowledge their darkness. Um, whether that darkness is welling up from inside or whether it was kind of inflicted on them.
Yes,
Um, yeah.
I agree.
So
I
yeah.
also think it's very, very important that this image that Sutland has of this prince wandering the wilderness, fending for himself, becoming king of the forest, is a very masculine fantasy
Mm,
of existence, right? Like
yeah.
this, it's a very male coded, like conquering the forest. Like this is I'm not wrong here, right?
Yeah. No, I mean he uses the word king, doesn't he? Or king.
I
I
mean, he
thought it
uses
was in there.
kingdom, so yeah,
Kingdom. Yeah. It's another fantasy of sort of domination, right? Yeah. I
yeah.
think you're totally right.
that
Um,
that that any man, all a man would have to do is walk out into the wilderness, and he with his manliness and power could bend it to its will, and it would become his kingdom. That like you're gonna
yeah.
you're gonna hunt, you're gonna forage for your own food, you're gonna build your own shelter, and you're gonna be happier than. And of course, it's a fantasy. It's
Yeah.
bullshit. And of course, Prince is like living embodiment of that bullshit because he's a sweet little dog that was not trained to exist and live in the wilderness. But like, neither is neither is any man who has this fantasy, right?
Right. Yes, the man. I mean, it's funny because you immediately imagine like, yeah, and what would I do if I were thrown into the woods? I would probably die faster than a literal dog,
Yeah.
because at least a dog can chase down a rabbit.
Hmm.
Um, so I found this to be a remarkably effective, like single paragraph, especially as just like for my money, the cleanest representation of King's concept of the banality of evil that we've ever encountered in the 700 King books we've read. Like it's simply the image of a man abandoning his dog in the woods while singing "Born Free" as he drives away, having delusionally semi convinced himself that the dog's gonna be fine. It's like, yeah, that's exactly King's banality of evil. A person
Yep.
doing something terrible while having a story that allows them to sleep at night.
Yep. Yep. And then we get to see the consequence of this now is right that this dog that shouldn't be here, that shouldn't have been treated this way, is now a starving animal that is now Jesse's problem.
Yep.
So thanks, men. God, we're the worst. So the good boy, formerly known as Prince, continues to scope out the situation. He's desperate and hungry, and so despite the danger and Jesse's constant yelling, he crawls into the room. And there we move on to our final chapter of the week, chapter 8. Jesse tries to kick out at the dog and barely grazes him. Prince doesn't run, but he does lunge at her and almost gets her foot. The message, Matt, here is clear: leave me be to my meal, or I'm gonna fuck you up. I'll
Yeah.
fuck you up real bad.
I just have to say this is like a perfect depiction of dog behavior where,
Hmm.
it's like there's intelligence, there's a very strategic kind of intelligence in play,
Yes.
but while not overdoing it and making it seem like the dog is like, human level intelligence. It's just like, no, dogs can communicate in this way that we're seeing here.
Yep. Yep. I really love this little paragraph here. This was now, and things were what they were. Survival was not a matter for politeness or apology. It hadn't eaten for 2 days. There was food here, and although there was also a master here who didn't want it to take the food, the days where there had been masters who laughed and patted its head and called it good dog and gave it scraps for doing its small repertoire of tricks was all gone. This master's feet were small and soft instead of hard and hurtful, and its voice said it was powerless. I think this is really important in a book where we are kind of primed to s- that Jessie is going to be in a situation where she's fighting for her survival, right? Like this general concept, statement being made here of survival was not a matter for politeness or apology, right?
Hmm.
That this was now, and things were what they were. So and these are both these sentences I think work perfectly for Jessie and the situation she's found herself in and what she's going to have to figure out that she needs to do to survive this thing. She maybe even hasn't fully realized that yet, but that's where we're going, right? Even the idea of it hadn't eaten for 2 days. Well, 2 days. Fast forward 2 days from now, Jesse's going to be handcuffed to this bed and have not going to eaten. So what are you going to do, Jesse? How are you going to survive? Um,
Fantastic point. The dog is just further down the road.
yep,
Um,
yep,
I also just love the phrase. She's the dog referring to Jesse, thinking its voice said it was powerless.
hmm,
Even though it can't understand what she's saying, just from the sound of her voice,
yep,
the dog can tell that she's powerless. And I think that can be read not just in this moment that she doesn't have the power to stop him from eating, but that more metaphysically, she is in fact powerless. She has no power.
yep.
She never has, or she hasn't for a very long time.
Yeah, and the angle, the point of view of the dog allows us to see this just bluntly and clearly. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
both physically and mentally. Yeah, I love
Yep.
it. So the dog begins to drag Gerald away for eating, which, despite my sympathy for the doggy and my hatred for all the men in this book, is quite a disturbing image to get stuck in one's head of a dog, a sweet old dog dragging a corpse across a floor. It's pretty fucked up,
How can you
right?
be mad at the good boy? He's just hungry.
It's a person.
It's a corpse.
You are a cannibal. Like, this is going to be the ultimate reveal of this podcast is 7 years later. Yeah, I mean, sometimes you eat a man. At least I'm not killing him.
Now I'm imagining the scenario where like you and I are trapped on a desert island and we have to. I just feel like my line where I would be willing to cross that line is probably a little closer than
It's
your
like that
line.
it's like that movie Life about the soccer team that crashes in the mountains and they eventually have to eat people and
Uh
you're
huh.
just like 3 days ahead of them all
Yeah. Yeah.
actually
Exactly.
putting on weight.
Yeah.
Oh my god. All right. So Jesse, you know, just is horrified by this image, right? And she it kind of in her anger tries to grab out something. She manages to grab a stupid frat boy ashtray that Gerald has. Does he even smoke? Can't even remember if he actually smokes, but he just keeps this stupid fraternity ashtray on the shelf above his bed. Um,
I thought he did smoke, but now
he
I don't
probably
remember.
does. Yeah, I mean he's probably part of the heart attack, right?
Yeah.
He's overweight. He's smoking. He's drinking a lot. Yeah.
It's the early 90s.
Yeah, everybody smokes. So she manages to grab the ashtray off the shelf and throw it at the dog, and she actually manages to hit it. I love the writing here, Matt. She would feel it all later, every move, jerk, and twist she had made. But for now, she was transported with savage delight at the success of her shot, and felt that if she did not somehow express her triumphant delirium, she might explode. She drummed her feet on the coverlet and rocked her body from side to side, her sweaty hair flailing her cheeks and temples like tendons in her the tendons in her throat standing out like fat wires. Ha! She cried, I got you. Ha! So that's interesting, Matt, right?
Hmm.
First of all, one of the things I caught here in this this idea felt that if she did not somehow express her triumphant delirium, she might explode. And I think this echoes an earlier moment in the chapters when she strikes out at her brother after he gooses her. The way she describes it is that she didn't act on the anger welling inside her. If she didn't act on this, she felt like she might explode. So I do think there's enough concurrent beats of this that it, there's this thing happening with Jessie perhaps at certain moments where like she feels so acutely these emotions that she just has to act upon them, which is almost in contrast with the person we've seen before who was just kind of so willing to just like let it happen and take it because it was the easier route.
Hmm.
But she's continually bumping up against that concept
Yeah.
recently and unable to do that in either way. Like she's unable to stop her anger, but here she's not unable to stop her delight. She's just like the things are breaking through, cracks are forming in this emotional facade she's created for herself.
Yes, whatever it is that's been keeping it all suppressed is breaking down. I like that.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's really interesting, this whole thing, because essentially this does nothing, right? The ashtray, she manages to hit the dog. She does hit it. It thinks for a moment about running, and then its hunger once again overcomes its uncertainty and fear, and it stays. So
Hmm.
she's done this thing, she's hurt herself, and essentially for nothing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting that we give Jesse this basically totally meaningless win. If anything, she threw away what might have been a useful tool in the form of the ashtray.
Hmm.
Um, it feels so hollow that it actually ends up kind of feeling worse than if she hadn't done anything at all.
Yeah. I thought for a long while about what we were perhaps trying to do with this, and I didn't have a satisfying conclusion outside of, it's kind of what we already talked about with like her ability to kind of control herself is breaking down, and
Hmm.
that might ultimately be a good thing. But yeah, I couldn't find a good kind of angle on the futility of it as a choice to make here.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think I feel like we're setting something up more than we are like seeing the full form of the thing. Where
Sure.
not that this is going to be a three beat specifically, but it's like I feel this feels more like the first beat of a three beat than it does like the culmination of something where it's like, well, she has lashed out physically in an attempt to gain power, to exert power, and failed. In fact, even though she successfully hit the target, she still failed to achieve the objective. And I don't know. I think that this is just something we can put a pin in and see if a similar concept crops up again.
Yeah, yeah, interesting. I got some ideas percolating, but maybe we'll revisit that in a later week.
Okay.
One thing I am very clear on that I do really love is as the dog kind of comes back, tears a piece of Gerald off to take it into the corner and eat it. Jessie tries to cover her eyes
Hmm.
with her hands. Like she tries to go like this, and of course she
Hmm.
can't because her hands are tied. So like this really wonderful image of this woman desperately trying to look away and blind herself from her situation, but she is now physically incapable of doing it. And
Hmm.
I think this is kind of a perfect visual metaphor for what is about to happen to Jessie over the course of this book. That she has now gotten herself in a situation where things are beginning to happen both inside and by both outside literally with Jessie and then inside internally with Jessie, and she will not be able to stop or shield herself from seeing it anymore,
Mm.
because she literally cannot. Her hands cannot cover her face. She cannot,
Yeah.
and I think that's really powerful image.
Can't cover her face. I agree. That's a fantastic image. Also, just wanted to mention, speaking of like senses, that she keeps hearing the sounds. She can't actually see what the dog is doing generally, but she can hear, and the sounds are described to us
Hmm.
in ways that are extremely evocative and
Yes. Yes.
cause you to imagine things that are happening
Yep.
to the body.
That's for sure.
Uh huh.
And that is where we're going to leave it this week. Our chapter ends with Prince grabbing his big old chunk of Gerald and walking back to the safety of the hallway, and he starts chomping down. So
Yep.
that's it, Matt. In 90 short pages, we went from asshole rapist husband to dog food.
Yep. A big old bicep steak.
Yep. Yep. All right, so that is our first episode on Gerald's Game. Next week, we're going to continue with chapters 9 through 13 of the novel as we figure out how the hell Jesse's going to get out of this one. I can't wait. This was a lot of fun, Matt. I'm enjoying this. It's good to be back in the book talk.
I agree.
And
It's good to stretch those muscles again.
yeah, for sure. All right, before we go, though, we do have some discussion question work to do. So we've got our question from a couple weeks ago. This was on the Before I Wake episode where we talked about Flanagan's 2016 very sad movie about the death of children and dreams. Matt,
Yep.
What was the question we asked on that episode?
The question was, what is your favorite use of dreams in stories? And from eman9001, we have, we're just going to ignore the controversy for a few minutes and talk about how damn good Neil Gaiman's The Sandman is. Our protagonist, Morpheus, being the personification of dreams, explores the importance of dreams, our perception of reality, and even the utility of nightmares. One of my favorite examples of this is that dreams are the cornerstone of the entire cosmology of this universe. Mortals believed in the gods hard enough and dreamed of them and the ideals they represented enough that through Morpheus, they actually dreamed these gods into existence. The gods' powers now equates to the amount of belief people have for them and the amount of beings dreaming of their divinity. The gods are paradoxically made up and real as long as you believe in them. Certainly an interesting take on dreaming, perception, and the nature of belief.
Well, that sounds a
Cool.
lot like American Gods, Mr. Gaiman. Did you just use your idea over again?
This guy's a hack.
Yeah. It's okay. We can hate him now. He's a monster.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want
How
to get into
appropriate.
it, but
Yeah.
literal monster. Yeah, I think we had to read, like, I can't remember. There was an episode of Doofcast we did where we had to read a couple of the first issues of Sandman. Maybe.
I haven't read Sandman. I think
Okay,
you'd read
then I'm
Sandman
just
on your own.
mistaken.
I think it was because we were reading some other graphic novels and you were like on a graphic novel kick.
Yeah. I suck at reading. We've talked about this a million times before that I suck at reading comic books, and so I bought like the first two Sandmans and I read them and I was like, that was neat, but I'm not really getting a lot out of this. It's because I'm just bad at reading comic books.
Yeah. My problem is I just treat them like books and then I just read them.
Yep. I was like, oh yeah, there are pictures. I forgot to look at all the pictures and I have no idea what's going on.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Me too.
All right. Next we have Hans Baka R23PO. Who says, throughout the entirety of The Sopranos, the dream sequences they do are absolutely perfect. Is this the same Sopranos person, or are we just getting multiple Sopranos answers 2 weeks in a row?
I don't know.
I love it.
I don't think I've heard the name Hans Baka R23PO. I think I would remember that. So
I agree. Welcome, Hans Baka. Thanks for your Sopranos answer. I've never seen a more accurate representation of dreams before or since. Spoiler! There's a lot to choose from, but I'll focus on the season 6 Coma Purgatory Dream. It's a powerful and symbolic representation of his struggle with mortality, the weight of his past actions, and the potential consequences of his life choices. It's a purgatorial experience where he confronts his fears, regrets, and the possibility of an afterlife where he must face the repercussions of his criminal life. Anyway, $4 a pound. I think that was pretty good at not necessarily being a spoiler, but also being a little spoilery. Good job, Hans Baka, R23PO.
I feel like everyone at this point knows everything that happened in The Sopranos.
That's true.
That's true. It's fine.
The original Prestige TV show.
Yeah. That's a cool answer though. I haven't seen it, so I can't really comment. Apocalypse Win 7 says, is it cheating to say all of the Wizard of Oz, at least the parts that aren't sepia toned? I also love the double fake out nightmare from American Werewolf in London. The main character has a dream where his family is gunned down by werewolf Nazis. It's hilarious after you stop screaming. Then he wakes up in bed. His girlfriend comforts him. She goes to open the window for some fresh air, then is stabbed by a werewolf Nazi through the window. Dream within a dream. It's fun to watch people's first time reactions to the scene. It's really quite jarring.
I remember that one. That's a good one. I have a question for you though.
Uh-huh.
We all know that the Wizard of Oz ends with her waking up and realizing it was all a dream.
Uh-huh.
But what this podcast presupposes is Was it?
What if it wasn't? Um, no, it wasn't.
Is it?
I've never believed it.
Yeah, I mean, like that's. I mean, I've never actually stopped and like inspected the Wizard of Oz to the level of like, are we actually meant to walk away from the movie believing that everything that occurs in Oz was just actually for realsies a dream?
I mean, I that's a good question. I feel like the metaphysics don't really stand up to it if you think about it too hard, and it's actually just probably a dream. But I have always chosen to believe that she actually went on a magical adventure,
Hmm.
and then when she wished herself home, the form that wish took was like that she would just wake up in her bed.
I
Uh,
like it. But what if the bad witch was actually good and sang a lot?
and but we kind of wish she sang more and talked less, and that the movie was shorter. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Talking about Wicked.
I think everyone got
Okay.
that. All right. Is it my turn? Yeah. Um, Aqualungfish says, at first I was trying to think of movies or TV shows with good use of dreams. Then I realized it just said storytelling. Yes, it will always just say storytelling. We're not going to hold you to any form of storytelling. We just want to hear you talk about stories.
Yep.
So I'm going to go with a little known web serial called Ward.
Excellent.
Dreams play a very large role in that story from beginning to end, which, if you don't know, is a long stretch. That's true. Without going into details, what I like about is the shifting nature of the dreams. They start out as kind of an obstacle to several of the characters before becoming a kind of background element that has to be worked around, then eventually being one of the keys to finding and solving the overarching problem. Throughout all of this, they provide tons of character and setting insight and allow for abstract approaches to understanding what's happening to the characters. It's one of the most integral to the story uses of dreams I can think of. It's a pretty good book too.
It is. It's funny that book is so huge and sprawling that I like forgot about this.
Yeah.
Like are we talking about the dream room, or are we talking about something else?
I legitimately changed my mind about that several times while reading the answer to the
Uh-huh.
question. So, yes.
Okay. Got
I
it.
think it is most succinct to the dream room and everything that occurs around the dream room. But yeah,
Okay.
obviously like there's it's impossible to talk about this book without spoiling it. Um, read Wild Bill's
Yeah.
Worm and Ward. They're pretty
Yeah.
good. Like there's a lot of I think new listeners we have that have not heard us drone on about these web serials for hundreds and hundreds of hours. But like as a person who doesn't really read web serials that didn't really take the format seriously before reading this one, it's pretty good. Y'all should
Yeah.
read it.
I also feel like Ward is underrated. I love Ward so much.
Hmm.
Um, I really do.
I
But
do
you got to
too.
read Worm first, of course. But um,
The only
yeah,
thing
great
that
stories.
the only thing about Ward is that we covered it while it was coming out, and so it took us like 3 years to read it.
Yeah,
Which is just which is just pulls an already very long thing out so far that what happens is exactly what happens to you, that it's already big and unwieldy, and it becomes even bigger and unwieldy when you have like 27 huge life events that occur while you're reading it.
yeah, and it becomes literally hard to remember what happened earlier in the story.
Yep.
Sure.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right. Scarlet Claret, I think, or Scarlet Claret
See, that would
says
rhyme, so I would go with that one.
Scarlet Claret says, going for the low hanging fruit, The Stand. The first section of the book is mostly non supernatural horror and character introductions. Once the stage is set, bam, creepy collective dreams, rats in the corn, sweet treats, nice old lady, and a walking dude. The dreams usher our characters from their uh, grim new reality to a world where God takes matters into his own hand. Hmm. And there is a grand design. Honorable mention, Ralph's dreams of his wife in insomnia always give me the cold shivers.
Great answer, Scarlet Colore. Did you know Kingcast had Stephen King on their podcast a couple weeks ago, and they tried to ask him what's the deal with the corn, and he
Uh-huh.
just disappointingly did not admit that he has a corn fetish.
Uh-huh.
Was really
Did
bummed.
not engage with the idea of explaining why corn and sex are
So horny.
intimately tied together in all of his
Yeah.
books.
Uh-huh.
Oh well,
Yeah. Oh well. He
unfortunately.
did say that there's going to be a lot of corn in the third Talisman book, though,
Ooh.
because
So
at least some of it will take place in Nebraska,
it's gonna be rated R.
in the fields not meant for eating corn, but for the fuel corn.
Oh. I wonder if that's gonna take on a sexual dimension.
Wonder if it's pink corn or red corn. What do you think?
I think it's gonna be pink corn.
Great answers, everyone. Thank you so much. These are really good. We had asked this question on Kingslingers before. I'm pretty sure, possibly even when we were covering Insomnia, like Scarlet Claret mentions here.
Mhm.
But it's always fun to revisit these questions because there's so many dream thingies out there. Lots of good ones. I saw some Buffy answers. Dream stuff can also be frustrating because we've talked about this. It's like a cheat code
Mhm.
for expressing information you can't figure out how to do otherwise in the story. But it can also be a really fun way of exploring fun imagery and themes and ideas and stuff like that.
Yeah, I definitely enjoy using it as a technique, but I kind of also, whenever I use it, I get that feeling of like, is this the best way to do this, or should I have like put this in the actual story? you know,
Sure, sure. All right. That is it for last week's question. Matt, what are we asking folks in a couple weeks?
in a couple weeks, the question is, what's your favorite trapped in a bad situation story slash movie slash narrative?
So, like for example, being handcuffed to a bed in the middle of nowhere would be a good example of that, right?
That's right. That would be. You could almost say that's what inspired the question.
You could almost say that. All right, folks, that is it for us this week. As we said, next week we will continue with part 2 of Stephen King's Gerald Game. We're going to be reading chapters 9 through 13 of the novel.
That's right. Remember, you can reach us via email at flanaganswakepod@gmail.com, over on X at flanaganswake19, on Instagram at Doof Media, on Blue Sky at Flanagan's Wake Pod, and over on the subreddit at reddit.com/r/Doof Media, which is probably the best way to answer that discussion question and to engage in all the ongoing conversations about Flanagan movies, etc., other movies. We're doing our Oscar series over on the Doofcast where we watch all the Oscar, the Best Picture nominees. That's been mixed so far, but we're having fun anyway.
It started off rough, but things are looking up.
Yeah.
It also, Matt, seems like Honora has firmly taken front runner status right now,
Huh.
so Honora might end up being the winner.
That's fine.
Yeah.
Anyway, please leave us a comment on our YouTube channel if you enjoy the podcast.
Yeah, and if you also enjoy the podcast and want to show off that enjoyment to everyone, head on over to our merch store. It is doofmedia.myshopify.com. There you will find merch for this show, for Flanagan's Wake, for some of our past shows, Kingslingers. We've talked about Kingslingers a lot this week because we're back to reading and talking about Stephen King. We're coming home, so we're there again. But we have a bunch of stuff there, mugs, buttons, hats, coats, blankets, anything you can think of. I think they're really cool. We got someone on our Discord today just talking about how comfy our zip up hoodies are, Matt. So if you need a good zip up hoodie, we've got a good one that says Kingslingers on it.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
If you like Flanagan's Wake or any of our shows and you want to support us, then please consider donating to our Patreon account at patreon.com/doofmedia. We got another episode of our bonus podcast covering the TV show From, released recently, and we're already getting ready to record the next one.
Yeah, I get so confused by stuff because we're always recording a week in advance, but another one should be coming out pretty soon. We're doing those once a month. So
yeah.
And if you cannot afford to donate to us right now, that is absolutely okay. As we said, the show is really just starting to hit its stride, and we continue to need your help in making sure it's getting out there. We're entering the new phase right now. We have people that have just been listening to us talk about movies. Well, now this is what we do when we talk about books. We do it a little bit differently because we really like it. We really have a lot of fun with it. So please share the podcast. There's probably some Stephen King people that maybe want to listen to us talk about King some more. So share that with them as well. some exciting stuff to come. So keep sharing it. Y'all have been doing a great job with that so far. And please also keep leaving us those rating and reviews. As we said, every little bit of them helps. This week's review comes from, I thought I had one that I read, and now I'm starting to doubt it. So this one's comes from Herd Forestry, who says, "Better than ever. Scott and Matt are back with a fantastic new show. The best of Kingslingers now includes videos and mixed media. Their in-depth analysis of movies, TV shows, and books has kept me a fan of theirs for over 5 years, and I keep coming back for more. Can't wait for the next 100 episodes. Long days and pleasant nights." Well, that was very nice. Thank you so much. It's great to see our old fans joining us in our new stuff.
Yeah.
It's very, very, very good to see. Glad
Yeah.
you're enjoying it.
Yeah, welcome. Hope you're having fun.
Thank you to everyone who sends those reviews in. Please keep them coming. I need to get this in a spreadsheet to make sure I'm getting them all, because we're getting them in fast and furious now, and we really do appreciate it. So keep them coming.
Yep.
All right, folks, that is it. We will see you back here for more Gerald's Game as we continue to move towards the Flanagan adaptation and beyond. We'll see you next week.